Hi, everyone. I think we're getting started now. My name is Tammy Bernaski. I'm a research officer at Aviance, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from Sydney, Nova Scotia, which is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. So welcome to today's panel discussion. There'll be a live Q&A session after the presentations. To ask a question during the Q&A, type your question into the Q&A box or into the chat. The Q&A feature and the chat will both be monitored and moderated during the Q&A sessions. You can also raise your hand in the Zoom, and one of the panelists will unmute you so that you can ask your questions. So I'd like to welcome you today to the workshop on education, employment, and leadership opportunities for youth with disabilities. As we know, many youth with disabilities encounter barriers in completing post-secondary education and finding meaningful employment opportunities. This panel will explore experiences of youth with disabilities in accessing education and employment. First, the findings of a scoping review on the impact of race and ethnicity on school and work outcomes for youth with disabilities will be shared. And then youth with lived experience will then share their experience working with Aviance, a national disability organization, which focuses on mutual learning, mentorship, intersectionality, critical reflexivity, and inclusive processes for progressive realization of human rights within and beyond the workplace. Our panel starts today with Dr. Sally Lindsay, who is a senior scientist at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. I'm just slowing down for the interpreters. I realize I'm speaking quickly, sorry. We'll show a video now of Sally's presentation, which is entitled Exploring the Relationships Between Race and Ethnicity on School and Work Outcomes Among Youth and Young Adults with Disabilities, a Scoping Review. So I'll ask now that you show the video. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to our presentation on exploring the relationships between race and ethnicity on school and work outcomes among youth and young adults with disabilities. First, we'd like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat and Seneca and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting is still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So in looking at some of the background literature on this topic, we can see that over 14% of Canadian youth with disabilities are from ethnically diverse backgrounds. Youth from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds are often among those in greatest need for services and supports, and yet they encounter many challenges in accessing services compared to white youth. At the same time, healthcare professionals often also report lacking training in culturally sensitive approaches, which can impact the quality of care they provide. Our review is novel in that it focuses on the impact of race and ethnicity on school and work among youth with various types of disabilities. Previous reviews have focused mostly on health outcomes rather than school and work. The objective of our review aimed to explore the associations between race and ethnicity on school and work outcomes for youth and young adults with disabilities. In terms of our methods, we followed the ARCSI and O'Malley's Scoping Review Guidelines to assess our research question. We used several key concepts around race, ethnicity, culture, disability, and youth and young adults, and applied them to the following databases listed here. In terms of our inclusion criteria, we included studies that were published in peer-reviewed journals in English or French over the past 20 years. Studies needed to include a sample of youth and young adults defined as up to age 30 who had a disability, and our definition of disability was based on the International Classification of Functioning and Disability and Health. We also included a very detailed list of common childhood disabilities. Studies also had to include at least one quantitative finding on the association or impact between race and ethnicity on a school and work outcome. So here is an overview of our search process and study selection that were applied to the following databases. We excluded the duplicates. We had several of our members of our research team who screened all the titles and abstracts. And then several members of our team also assessed all of the full text articles of the studies meeting our inclusion criteria. And here in the box on the right-hand side, we've outlined all of the reasons for exclusion. And we ended up having 49 articles that met our inclusion criteria. So of these studies that met the inclusion criteria, they were surprisingly only conducted in the US over the past 21 years. And here is a graph showing the racial and ethnic composition of the sample. And again, surprisingly, even though most of the studies were reporting on racial and ethnic differences, the majority of the samples, 78% of them, had a white majority sample. So in looking at the results that focused on school outcomes, the majority of the studies focusing on school outcomes, youth with disabilities from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds had poorer school outcomes than white youth with disabilities. Factors affecting outcomes included expectation differences due to culture, inequitable service and resource access, and discrimination. And although the majority of the studies showed that ethnic and racial youth with disabilities had poorer school outcomes, 24% of them showed that youth with disabilities from an ethnic minority background had better school outcomes than other groups of youth with disabilities. So the findings were indeed somewhat mixed. 33% of the studies reported that race and ethnic related factors affecting school outcomes among youth with disabilities. And 14% of studies showed that race and ethnicity had no impact on school outcomes. So again, the findings were quite mixed in the association between school and racial and ethnic minority groups. So in looking at employment outcomes, in the majority of the studies relating to employment, youth with disabilities from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds had worse employment outcomes than white youth with disabilities. So again, similarly to the findings in the school outcomes, the work outcomes also showed very mixed findings. So 60% of the studies focusing on the impact of race and ethnicity on employment outcomes were showing quite mixed findings. And 54% of the studies reported that racial and ethnic minority youth with disabilities had worse outcomes. Meanwhile, 15% of some studies reported that they had better outcomes, somewhat depending on the group that was being focused on and how they were in the outcomes that they were looking at. 36% of the studies described that white youth with disabilities had better employment outcomes compared to racial and ethnic minority youth with disabilities. And meanwhile, 24% found no association between race or ethnicity on school and work outcomes. So our findings highlight the disparities that exist for youth and young adults with disabilities from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds. There are several implications that could be considered, especially for educators and clinicians. They could consider providing culturally safe and inclusive interventions, things such as career exploration, transition assessment and planning, and to help racially and ethnic diverse youth with disabilities to reach their full school and work potential. They could also consider educating themselves on understanding the complex intersection between race, ethnicity, disability, among other factors. And clinicians and educators should also consider participating in culturally sensitive training. So it's also important to acknowledge the limitations of our review. Despite a comprehensive search, our review did only find studies that were within the US. And many of the studies included in our review were secondary analysis, and race and ethnicity was not the primary focus. And a lot of them also did draw on the same or similar databases. Most of the studies described race and ethnicity using binary variables, so minority or non-minority. And we know that this does not capture the complex associations that race and ethnicity have on school and work outcomes. So in terms of future directions, future studies should aim to understand the lived experiences of racial and ethnically diverse youth with disabilities to address the school and work barriers that they experience. And just acknowledging our funding partners. Thank you so much.
Great. So thank you to Sally for sharing that very interesting scoping review and some of the findings from that review. I'm going to turn now, we'll just move right along into the next set of presentations. We'll have Evan Wickland today. He's going to be speaking as a senior research officer with Aviance, and he'll share about Aviance and the Youth Leadership Project. And then we'll hear from Chloe Godin-Jacques and Milika Jaigel. So I'll turn it over to you, Evan.
Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Evan Wickland. I am a senior research officer, as Tammy said, at the Manitoba and a Manitoba office lead at Aviance Incorporated as the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. This presentation is called Making Space for Youth Leaders, Meaningful Experiences with a National Organization. It will be delivered by myself and my colleagues at Aviance, including interns Milika Jaigel and Chloe Godin-Jacques. Before we begin, I would like to thank the conference organizers for having us this afternoon, and thank you to Dr. Sally Lindsay and her colleagues for their presentation. And of course, thank you to Dr. Bernaske for monitoring this discussion. So here's how we will proceed today. We'll first provide a general introduction about Aviance, what we do as an organization, who we are, how we're located, etc. I will then briefly outline the project that we have undertaken at Aviance, and that project is called Making Space for Youth Leaders. I will then invite Milika and Chloe to present on their experiences at Aviance to date with two of the interns for this project. And then we'll take about 10 minutes, hopefully 10 to 15 minutes at the end to engage in a discussion and answer any questions that you might have. Okay, I'd first like to acknowledge that Aviance's head office in Manitoba, here in Winnipeg, is located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and it's the homeland of the Métis Nation. Okay, so before we get into the actual project that we'll be talking about, I have a couple of slides that outline who Aviance is and what we do. So we are a community-based, university-affiliated organization that works on research, community-based research, of course, education and development related to cross-disability issues. And we focus on developing strategic partnerships. We work in collaboration and we work on capacity building to co-create approaches to address the social, political, economical, etc. issues that reflect the needs and interests of diverse people with disabilities. So while our head office is located in Winnipeg, we have employees that work from various areas of Canada. So here are a few activities that we undertake at Aviance. So we do community-based research, we do program evaluation, education, training and development, and consultation and community engagement. So we also focus on knowledge mobilization, which is a big part of what we do here. So in other words, we focus on knowledge to action. Ensuring that our research and our other products are in formats which are accessible to a broad audience. And that's really about meeting the community and our the folks that engage in our work, meeting them where they're at. So we just don't want the research that we're creating to sit on a shelf, that sort of idea. We want it to be out in the community and make meaningful change. That's the idea. Aviance is a values-based organization, and we are committed to exploring issues through a structural and systematic and intersectional lens. So our researchers and those who work with us, the employees, are trained to conduct their work in a reflexive way that honors diverse knowledges, that empowers the disability community and builds capacity for change. So we are driven by sort of three pillars around intersectionality, reflexivity, and human rights. These three elements are core to our processes in all of our work, and all of our work is conceptualized through these frameworks. And if you'd like to learn more about any of these components, I'd be happy to elaborate on them during the question and answer period, or you can visit our website, which I believe is on the primary site as well. For now, just a note for this presentation, we'll be touching on these components and engaging in some sort of reflexive process. So which means that we'll facilitate the time and space to listen to those that we work with and to attend to power relations at every step of the process. Okay. So now we're transitioning from what Eviance does as an organization to this project called Making Space for Youth Leaders. So this is right off the top, this is a multi-year project from 2020 to 2023. So we're sort of at the beginning, middle stages of the entire project. And it's funded by the Government of Canada's Social Development Partnerships Program, the disability component. So this project itself builds on the success of the Next to Lead project, which is a leadership training program for youth with disabilities that was run by the Niagara Centre for Independent Living, or NICL. So I'll refer to it moving on as NICL. Our current project builds upon the relationship between NICL and Eviance. And that just to tie the two pieces together, this project is being overseen by an advisory committee. So Maureen O'Neill, the executive director of NICL, and also Dr. Karen Oshida from the University of Toronto, and Dr. Susan Hardy, all of whom co-led the Next to Lead project. So this is an extension of that project. A few words on Dr. Hardy. Susan couldn't be here today, but Susan, just as far as biographical information, introducing some context into how youth leadership makes sense for Eviance. So Susan was hired at Eviance to bring her experiences related to cross-disability leadership that embraced intersectionality. Susan was a young leader herself in the grassroots movement. Whoops. My apologies for that. There we go. Sorry. So Susan was a young leader in the grassroots cross-disability movement and mentored by Joan Meister and Al Simpson, and was hired as the first coordinator of the National Network for Mental Health, NNMH. Susan embraced the responsibility of being hired by grassroots leaders across Canada and embraced leadership roles throughout her career while continually looking for opportunities to create space for other youth leaders. So Susan undertook research on early grassroots leadership at NNMH during her doctoral studies, and furthered this research on lived experience leadership while doing her postdoctoral work at Simon Fraser University. This research informed many presentations throughout Canada, and she was the only researcher at a meeting of international lived experience leaders at Yale in 2018. And today, Susan embraces the ethical leadership at Eviance. That is to say, this is contextual information to understand how we've sort of gotten and how we've sort of taken this project on. The project overview. So whilst with Susan's leadership, this project aims to develop the leadership capacity of youth by providing meaningful opportunities within Eviance, which is a national disability organization. The objective. So through partnership or participation at Eviance and its networks of national partners, youth interns will, and they already have, as I'll explain upcoming here, develop skills, internal capacities, and relationships to enable their own leadership potential. The project also enhances Eviance's organizational capacity, as well as its long-term sustainability, because through this project, we're ensuring that we can successfully integrate youth leadership into our work. So the benefits are certainly reciprocal. So here are a few activities we have undertaken in the last year and a half, I suppose. In the initial stages, we recruited interns and went through an orientation process. So this includes interns becoming acquainted with Eviance And we assisted them with, setting up their hardware, becoming comfortable in the Eviance space, I suppose, right? Ongoing supervision and check-in meetings. So each youth intern was designated a supervisor at Eviance for ongoing communication and dialogue, and meetings and check-in meetings are set up on an individual basis. So that looks different for each intern as well. And a variety of training opportunities. So for like right off the bat, that was one of the first things that we undertook. Tri-council ethics for any sort of research process. They undertook that. The Disability Rights Promotion International, or the DPRI. Interns also had training on intersectionality and reflexivity and what that means and how to apply that in research. And interns were also trained on literature reviews and environmental scans and other community-based research tasks. In the last while, the youth interns have also been encouraged, and they have completed a professional development plan for each. So each intern has come up with a personalized plan of how they plan to spend their time at Eviance, with the support of the staff, of course. Conference presentations such as this one, but also, we'll be looking for other opportunities in the future. Project work with Eviance. So when appropriate, interns have contributed to ongoing project work, and I believe Mylika and Chloe will touch on those ideas. Individualized projects as well. So interns, we'll discuss a little bit more about this as well. But one of the tasks, one of the large tasks that they've been asked to undertake was a project that related to the culture of Eviance, but that they were also passionate about. So, and they'll each talk about a little bit about their own projects, but it had to relate to, monitoring the CRPD, incorporating intersectionality and human rights. And, but it had to be a topic that, of course, they were interested in and had a passion for. Interns have also assisted with many other things, administration, participated on our board of directors, and have assisted with report writing as well. So things have been busy for the interns over the last year and a half, for sure. Anticipated outputs. So expected projects outputs, we're pretty early on in the project so far, but we anticipate that there'll be an improved leadership capacity of interns, youth-led contributions to the UNCRPD monitoring process in Canada, presentations for regional, national, and international audiences. It's expected that we'll be doing reports on results of research or education projects led by the interns, and evaluation. So we've done an internal evaluation so far, and this will be finalized in January. So it's difficult to tell exactly where we're at with that, but we'll be using this data moving forward to guide our work. And we can look for opportunities for advancing this project with other community-based organizations. So those are just a little bit about our project. So I'll now hand it over to Chloe and welcome her to share her thoughts on her experiences at Eviance to date as an intern.
Hello everyone, my name is Chloe Catherine. My pronouns are she and they, and I am an intern at Eviance under the youth leadership project. Throughout the next 10 minutes or so, I will discuss my positionality. I will provide a brief overview of my role at Eviance, and finally, I will share some thoughts about my individualized project. So to begin, I am located on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe Autonomous Lenni, Biwak, and Sonotone nations, otherwise known as Northern Ontario. I'm position myself as a white settler queer researcher. I am currently in the midst of completing my first term as a doctoral student at Western University's Faculty of Education. My research lies within the intersections of critical disability theory and queer theory, where I am specifically investigating activism opportunities for queer within complex academic boundaries. I am grateful for the opportunity to share my experience as an Avian youth leadership intern with you all this afternoon. Not only do I absolutely love my position and my virtual work environment, but I really believe that social program is vital in reducing a disproportionately low employment rate for persons with disabilities. In the case of everyone, specifically youth with disabilities. Intensive targeted to persons with disabilities allow us to develop leadership capacity and other soft skills in brief and safe spaces. Among colleagues who recognize the complexities of navigating the workforce as members of equity-seeking communities. I believe this is more evident at everyone through the creation and implementation of work plans in which all diverse and intersectional needs always remain at the forefront of our work. One of the reasons I was drawn in applying for an internship with everyone was a strong alliance with other influential community-based organizations, and this within both the local and international spheres. Most of my professional experience are rooted within academia, and as such, I was interested in exploring the intricacies of community research as well as gaining knowledge and skills that I could then transfer in my future endeavors. For instance, based on the goal established in my professional development plan, I participated in the elaboration of an environmental scan to retrieve community-based mental health services and support. This primarily consisted of analyzing them and completing reflexive notes that highlighted my findings. The skills gained through the mental health process have led me to conduct a preliminary environmental scan for my individualized process. Although it is not quite as extensive, my scan is providing insight to ultimately narrow the scope of my project that will be located at the intersection of disability and sociality. These findings will allow me to identify imminent gaps and from there hold a research proposal outlining the need for my project. If interested in learning more about this process, please do not hesitate to reach out through email, which is located at the bottom of this slide. I recognize my professional and personal growth throughout the first year of my internship, and it excites me to reflect upon future strides. Thank you. And now pass it on to one of my colleagues, Malika.
Thank you, Chloe and Evan and Tammy, for the introduction. My name is Malika. I'm going to begin sharing my screen. And thank you all for being here today and joining our discussion. And I will walk you or take you through today with a little more in-depth introduction into who I am, what I've learned and gained at the internship. I will discuss a little bit about my individual project that I'm working on and provide a personal statement on the importance of meaningful work. All right, so my name is Malika Jadgal. I'm 27 years old and I graduated from Brock University with an undergraduate degree in medical sciences a few years ago. And I am a youth leadership intern at Eviance. I was introduced to Eviance through the Next to Lead program, funded by the Ontario Trillium Network. And in the Next to Lead program, I worked with other youth with disabilities on community-based projects, mostly around awareness. And when I found out about the opportunity to become a youth intern at Eviance, I was very excited to continue a similar journey. In the past, all the experiences and work that I shared was mostly volunteer. And now there was an opportunity for me to continue doing meaningful work and be honored financially, which was one of the reasons why I was more excited to apply to the internship. And I began my journey as a youth intern at Eviance with the sole intention to learn as much as I could and gain skills that would help me with my professional development. It has been a year since I have been a part of this internship, and I'm happy to say that I have learned an immense amount about disability and developed and refined some great skills that will benefit me with my professional plans. And I'm excited to continue learning through this opportunity. Not only was I interested in learning from the internship, but I also wanted to contribute my unique perspective and lived experience as a youth with a disability. One of the key activities that I participated in early on in the internship was to draft a professional development plan. This activity really made me think about how I would like to use my time in this capacity and how I can develop and gain skills that will support my future plans. And with all the training and workshops that I've been participating in, I've been accomplishing those goals that I've set out for myself early on. Now that I've completed 1 year into the internship, I was able to look back at my goals and plans that I noted early on, and I was able to see how I was working towards those goals and what I've been accomplishing so far. And it's a very rewarding experience when you look back and you see that you're actually achieving all those goals. And I felt that this exercise was very important to do early on. So all the efforts and work that I would be putting in would be meaningful. And this internship wouldn't just be a program to complete, and when it's done, I'd have to look for employment elsewhere. And I feel like at Eviance, I'm putting work and effort into something that will continue to grow and support me in the future. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to be working with other bright interns, and I was able to build strong reports with them. Although we come from different backgrounds, academic levels, and experiences, we've all been able to learn and support one another in all undertakings of the internship. This has helped to create a safe and positive space that was comfortable for all of us to learn in. All the interns have different skills and experiences, and this has also allowed us to learn from each other. And through the many workshops and training experiences, I learned about concepts such as intersectionality, reflexivity, the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, ethics, Disability Rights Promotion International, and why monitoring regulations like the CRPD is so important, along with many others. I was also exposed to many other projects that are going on at Eviance, and I was able to see research being done with best practices, and which in turn would guide me doing my own research. I get to see the administration, finances, planning, delivering, reporting, and knowledge mobilization part of research. Through the exposure, I've learned about the social development goals, system navigation, universal design, among many others. And through the project and the internship, I have the ability to do research on a topic that I feel passionately about and further investigate some of the articles of the CRPD. And on the next slide, I will present a graphic about what I plan on doing research on. So in my personal project, I plan on looking at inclusivity and accessibility in post-secondary education and how More inclusive and positive, more inclusive and accessible experiences in post-secondary education lead to better outcomes and students with disabilities to actually complete the program of choice. When people go to post-secondary education, people mostly think of it as classroom studying and then graduation, moving on. However, in reality, post-secondary education is more than just classroom learning. There's a lot of extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities, and development that goes on at post-secondary education. And then students graduate and move on. And post-secondary education, if it's not inclusive or accessible, students may feel overwhelmed and discouraged from continuing when they have great skills and insights to offer in programs that they should continue studying. So that's what I plan on looking at as my individual project. And going back to my professional development plan, when I completed the activity, I thought it was just an exercise to get me thinking about how I plan on spending my time. However, I later learned that my goals and plans were important to my mentors and supervisors as well. Not only did I submit a draft of my professional development plan, I reviewed it with my mentors and supervisors regularly, and we discussed my goals and how through the internship I can achieve those goals and skills. My goals were highlighted and always flagged in the minds of my mentors and supervisors, and they would always let me know about opportunities that would match my goals. This has even led me to other employment opportunities at Eviance. If my skills or goals didn't matter, I would not feel and be as supported as I am today. Through the internship, I was also given many opportunities to take on a leadership role and build my leadership skills. Upon completing the DRPI training modules, I eagerly took the opportunity to co-facilitate the training debrief sessions with our supervisors. This was a very interesting occasion for me because not only did I have to review what I was learning with my peers, I had to creatively think about ways to share our learnings in an engaging manner and think of discussion questions that relate to youth. I feel my input and insight was valuable because at one point I was on the receiving end and now I was on the delivering end. And that's just one example of how I was able to take on a leadership role. I hope my anecdote today clearly illustrates how this internship is truly a leadership opportunity in community-based employment. Finding meaningful employment can be difficult, and especially difficult if someone has a disability. If employers are not disability confident, then they may be hesitant to hire talented individuals with disabilities. The internship through Eviance is a mere demonstration of the potential individuals with disabilities can have and what they can do to enhance the organizations they work for if they're supported. When I think about the impact I want to create in the future and any necessary skills that I will need, I feel like I can look to the Eviance team to guide and support me. The interns are engaged in meaningful work, and we certainly have the potential to create positive change, influence legislature, and form a world where disability human rights are truly honored. And thank you for being a part of our discussion today. We'll be happy to engage in any questions or comments you may have, and I'm going to pass it back to Tammy.
I really want to thank everyone for your presentations today. Thank you to Sally and her colleagues for sharing a little bit about your study. Thank you to Evan for sharing about Eviance and the youth project. And very much a thank you to the youth leadership interns for sharing your personal experiences. We only have a couple minutes left. If you have questions, I would invite you now to either raise your hand, you can put them in the chat, or you can put them in the Q&A box as well. So are there any questions from our audience today for our panelists? We're a quiet group today. I do wonder if either Chloe or Malika, if you want to share a little bit about your personal project. No pressure, but if you want to share about your personal project. And I'll just remind the audience members that you can raise your hand if you want to unmute yourself to ask a question as well.
Sure. So I would love to speak more about my personal project. So once again, I plan on looking at inclusivity and accessibility in post-secondary education. And where I got this project idea is sort of personal. When I was in post-secondary education and post-secondary studies, I was studying medical sciences, and in the program, there was many co-curricular components that required laboratory activities. And when I would go to the lab, some of the labs didn't have accessible door opening buttons, and some of the tools and activities I didn't feel were inclusive of people with many sorts of disabilities. And I felt very alone in that experience. And I always wondered how I could speak up about these challenges that other students may be facing. So that's why I was interested in looking at that as a project. And I see that Steve has his hand up.
Steve, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, when Evan presented, he talked about kind of some of the main values of Eviance, and the one that really connected with me is an action component. So I'm just wondering, with the two interns, thanks so much for sharing a little bit of your experience. You can only do so much in 10 minutes, but how are you integrating action into your project going forward? Thank you.
Chloe or Malika?
Okay. Please go ahead, Chloe.
Okay. Thank you for your question, Steve. So a few components of Eviance lie at the heart of my project, such as intersectionality and reflexivity will be very important in terms of my project, not only for myself, but for others who might be interested in learning more about the process that I undertook in my project.
Thanks,
Thank
Chloe. It's Malika, did you have anything to add? But I just have maybe one or two sentences to add, but please go ahead if you want to comment on Steve's comment.
So thank you. And as for action, I feel that, as Chloe mentioned, the projects that we are working on, they are allowing us to not only realize challenges that people with disabilities face, but to take an approach by doing research to create change around those challenges or barriers that were highlighted.
Great, thanks, Malika. I just, from an Eviance, from an organizational point of view, I think I can just add just a couple of things to the great work that Chloe and Malika and others are doing. Like we're just lucky to have wonderful interns for sure. I think that as a community-based research organization, like it really means a lot to us that we're everything that we're doing is actionable. So it doesn't just, again, it's not research for the sake of research. We're mobilizing this knowledge at every point. So I would say, just off the top of my head, I can think of the evaluation that we're doing is important. An internal evaluation that's critical and supportive of everything that we're doing, and making changes as we go to make sure that this is an iterative process, not a finalized process, right? And throughout this next year and a half, we'll be making changes to make sure that we're keeping up with the feedback that we're getting, to make sure that this research, again, sounds, repeating, but doesn't sit on a shelf somewhere, right? We want Chloe and Mylika's work to be shared with community organizations, and presentations are a part of that. And there'll be more presentations as we move along, opportunities for publishing in articles or other, community-based avenues, for example. And we're looking for opportunities to extend this work. We know this is, it's a project, right? So there's limitations to the funding scope of this, and we'll continually be looking for opportunities to extend this work and make sure that there's other opportunities. And we'll be in a continual space of learning. And I think Eviance, the mantra sort of is this: we're in a very much a learning role. We're ongoing learners. We're always wanting to learn more about what's out there and how to advance disability rights in Canada and abroad. So so I appreciate the question, because that's a really important one for us, really core to our belief that this research, or everything that we're doing, has to be transferable, actionable, practical, right?
Thanks, Evan. Thank you, folks. There is a question in the Q&A box, and I realize that we're almost out of time, but I'll just read it because it's there. Steve says, thank you for sharing. There's not an anonymous question here. It says, thank you for sharing your experiences. I wonder what the #1 highlight of the presenters' experiences with the program are or were. So we have just a moment. I think we only have 1 minute, but if there's a highlight that you want to share, please go ahead.
One thing that I'd like to share, highlight, is the conversations that I've had with the Eviance team, all the members. They're very personable, and when we have conversations, I feel like they're very deep, and we think creatively. So I really enjoyed those conversations with each other.
Thanks. Thanks for your comments. I mean, Chloe, I just want to make sure that there's a space.
I don't think I have time.
Okay, we are at time. Thank you so much for your presentation. Great sessions. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. This is a very important area of focus, so I'm really happy to have been able to be a part of this today. So as we wrap up, I'll just a reminder that there are short vignettes that you can watch after you take a break, and that the live plenary will start at 2:10 p.m. So thank you everyone for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.